Ross Young, thanks very much for joining me. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thanks again for reaching out, David.
Uh, you are a pro podcaster as well as a professional in the cyberspace. And just to set the stage and provide some clout for things we're going to be talking about, especially coming from you, walk me through a bit of memory lane, what you've been doing to get to the point where you are today. And
Yeah.
before you made some pretty big roles, you've in this industry.
So I'm one of the lucky CISOs who actually knew he always wanted to do cybersecurity from the start. So I did a MBA with a focus in cybersecurity after having done a computer science undergrad, and I had an internship at NSA, so the National Security Agency. I worked for a year at the Federal Reserve Board. I spent 10 and a half years at the Central Intelligence Agency. Then I went as a segment CISO over at Capital One. And I spent the last 4 years as the CISO for Caterpillar Financial. So everybody knows the large construction manufacturing equipment company. They have their own bank insurance company inside of that. I headed all those cybersecurity oversights. And then currently I'm the CISO in residence at Team 8. And we're an Israeli company that invests in emerging startups out of Israel and build this amazing community for CISOs to connect and collaborate.
Fantastic, Ross. We share some of the academic background. Actually, we have very similar backgrounds, but that's where I think that things are end from a similarity perspective. So let me ask you this: um, you were at kind of the three letters agencies. Um, what was it like? So a lot of people they hear these names. Everybody has some sort of. You can't be I would say, oblivious or not have an opinion about it. And the training you get in some of these agencies is phenomenal. And there's a reason why you were successful doing some other things. But talk to me about this, a bit about the selection process and then also the training, which, because I think it's super important to understand uh, your capabilities and capacity to be successful down the road.
Yeah, so without going in anything too special, what I'll say is it's a highly coveted role. I mean, imagine as many people applying to be a Navy SEAL. That's how many people want to be in the CIA, right? Tons of people going in. So, very high talent bar to get in the doors. And then what I see there is just this fantastic commitment to training their people to be the best, right? They invest in training programs, they have mentoring programs, they have a lot of things to really help get you to be up to speed in some very, very unique areas that you would never find these types of jobs anywhere else, right? So I think that's what's really, really special about it. And the things that you get to solve are years ahead of the rest of the world. And I'll just kind of give you an example. There's certain things you can do with a 5-person pen test team. There's certain things you can do with a 50-person pen test team. And there's certain things you can do with a 500-person pen test team. Having a bigger size and scope allows everyone to develop unique special areas to dive into that could be very, very interesting. And so you get to see so much of pen testing, of offensive cybersecurity, of defensive cybersecurity in ways that you wouldn't normally see in small companies. And so I think that's what's really amazing is getting that view of, hey, what is the future going to be like for criminals targeting companies in the next 5 to 10 years? Because you're kind of seeing how it plays out first on the nation state realm.
What particular skill sets do you think that you have or attributes that were allow you to, as you mentioned, get through the selection process? And for those who have kids or younger teens or whatever, not what would you recommend? Is there something you can do to prepare somebody for a career at one of these agencies?
So, you know, CIA is primarily a human agency, so they have their own unique needs. But if you think about what any place like that is going to have, it's usually going to be communication skills. Those are huge, especially if you have foreign languages. They're always interested, and you can see this publicly where they're looking for people who speak hard target languages. The normal person doesn't speak Farsi, Russian, Arabic, Chinese, and those are things that they're always going to be looking at. So if you have a chance to learn a hard target language, that can only be really helpful for you. For me, one of the things I did is I served a Mormon mission for 2 years overseas, and I lived in Argentina. So I picked up Spanish, and that was a fantastic experience for me. And you could do other things like working in the UN, working in the Peace Corps, going to the military and learning languages. There's so many ways you can use those types of skills. And then the other thing is any type of role have some specific requirements. Like if you're going to do computer security, you probably need to have taken a few classes or certifications in order to be competitive to win those roles.
Yeah, it's super interesting. And then you get the experience you have there is tremendous, right? So it's kind of intense. It's I think spending like 1 year at the NSA is probably equal to X amount of years in the private sector. Is that, and it's also true for the military too. It's just the amount of sheer amount of training that you get, amount of hands-on experience, maybe exposed to a particular project and so on, is very different scale from you going to the private sector and going through like the motions of a company. Is that correct statement?
Yeah, I mean, you have to look at the motivations for things. Like private companies, usually they're commercial. They need to make money. So they're doing pen tests to do compliance. They're doing pen tests so that they have a product they can sell to customers. Most of the government doesn't have to have those same requirements. And they're motivated by different things. So commercial companies can pay lots of money. Government agencies are limited on the GS scale or other, scientific scales of what they can pay. And so what they're going to do is they're going to invest in their people more than the commercial side. And that's a big retainer for those places. You're either fighting or training is kind of what you hear in the DoD side of the house. And it's the same way in other sectors in the intelligence community. We want to have the best people who are extremely smart so that they know how to tackle things. They know how to solve problems. They think of things in a variety of different aspects.
And do you remember your transition to the kind of the private sector? What was it like to get your, because it's, again, it's very different. It's kind of like moving from the military to like a very structured organization, very hierarchical, to, to the private sector where it's more, there's still a hierarchy, but not as strict as the other, and not even the sizable of the other organization. Can you walk to me through like the process of moving to the private sector? Was it easy for you? What was the things that you remember from that transition?
Yeah, so that was a time that was a little bit tough for me because, I always considered myself an agency person for my entire career. I totally expected to be there for 30 plus years. And what I found was a lot of my goals and ambitions of having a career based overseas were unlikely to play out because of certain family situations and other things that I had. And so I started looking on the outside and I started connecting with people in the cybersecurity space. And, living in the DC area, one of the biggest places out there is Capital One. They have such a huge banking presence in the McLean, DC area. And, at the time, I was a little bit worried. I was worried about how many hours I would go from my government job to the commercial side because, a lot of people have burnout. I was also maybe a little bit worried about layoffs because, hey, as a federal employee, you're pretty safe. But, in this COVID world is very different. And, those things that I was worried about aren't really big things to maybe focus on so much because one, if you're good at your job, people want to keep you. And two, most companies find a healthy work balance because they know good employees get offers all the time to go out of their places. And they got to retain their best and brightest. So when I started looking, I looked for roles where I could grow, where I could have influence, where I could be interested in the work. And then I found opportunities that met me well at Capital One.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you approached it in a very analytical way, like you would as an analyst. But you applied that to your kind of your personal career trajectory, which is super interesting. And you gradually got more and more responsibilities, and you had some pretty big roles. Talk to me about that Like, how do you get from, from individual contributor to become management and then being responsible for more and more, uh, you know, areas within the business?
Yeah. So when you get your first management role because you apply for this role or you're recommended for the role, there is a huge shift in how you need to work. And so what I mean by that is in your first two or three roles, you're probably in a very technical role and you become the subject matter expert on AWS, on servers and Linux security, or on pen testing or incident response and knowing all the tools in the SOC. And then all of a sudden they're like, hey, you're really, really good. John just left out of this role. We want you to take John's role as the manager over one of these teams. Well, now you need to learn to delegate. And that can be tough because maybe somebody doesn't have the same work quality that you're used to doing. The second thing you need to really learn is communication skills, because the way you talk to people who are your peers is very different than the way you talk to subordinates when you're a manager. And you really need to understand how to ask questions in a way that's really going to help people. So if somebody makes a mistake and you go to them and be like, hey, this is stupid. Why did you do this? You just instantly insulted them, put them on the defensive side, and made them feel inferior. And even though you might be able to do that with your friends that you're just, razzing and you just grew up like that, you cannot do that as a manager. And so you have to learn to rephrase the way that you ask questions and the way you talk to people and say, hey, I don't know if you intended this, but here's the outcome of one of the decisions that you made. I just wanted to understand why you made that and how we got to this situation. And now that opens up a dialogue, a discussion where you can talk about things and really help people in a way that's very proactive and constructive for their career.
Sounds like a lot of on-the-job training, which means that it's not necessarily related to the technical side, but the management component and being able to communicate, as you mentioned, to your peers. But also, I'm assuming that once you get more and more responsibilities, then you have to report to the board, or you have to report to executives that don't necessarily have the technical acumen. Was that tough? Again, that's the ability to again translate some of the technical speak to business processes, and also figure out, as you mentioned, it's the big difference is that the businesses are there to make money. And so everything revolves really around that. So when we talk about cyber, it's really about protecting the crown jewels, what's important to the business. And you have to, a lot of times you have to figure what that is, what's important to the business. When you're at the CIA or the NSA, you know what's important. When you're at the business, you have to really figure out what from all the different processes that the business operates on, which one of these are the most important and really is going to cripple the company if something happens. How did you overcome all those, like in terms of figure things out as you grow into these roles?
Yeah, so I think the biggest change that fundamentally shifts is most of the time in a cyber organization, you're reporting to a boss that grew up in cyber, that knows cyber, and is an IT person at heart. And it goes all the way to the CIO. But if you ever speak to someone outside of the CIO organization, it's not that. They grew up in an accounting background, they grew up in a risk background, they grew up in a legal background, or they grew up in a sales background. And so the things that you take for granted of, hey, here's how our SIM and SOC and all these other acronyms work, they're like, I don't even know what any of that is. So that's the first thing you have to really understand is what's important for them to do their job. And a classic example of this could be going to them and just talking about what are your critical business processes. So to the sales team, you go over there and just say, hey, can you just walk me through and the three tools that you use 90% of your day to make your job super successful? It might be PowerPoint. It might be Salesforce as a CRM system, and maybe it's something else. And then you look through those systems and you're like, huh, okay. So you just kind of observe what's working and you're like, how impacted would you be if this system was down? Oh, that'd be catastrophic. Or, oh, you just go play golf for a day and you come back the next day and then it's up and alive. Okay. So once you understand what the key business processes are for each unit, And then you can kind of map that back to what are the 3 IT systems they spend 80% of their time on. Now you go back and you say, well, what are the ways I ensure those things are successful for your company? Because those are your most important apps to them, right? And ways you can help them, right? They know what tools suck. They know what tools need help. But a lot of times they don't know how to communicate that very, very well to the CIO. So if you can say, hey, it sounds like you're spending a lot of time on here. Here's what you should be asking for from the IT team to make a better product for you. And you can bridge that gap between them and the CIO. Now you have a natural in and they'll come to you and they'll start asking, well, hey, what should I do over here? And then you can start to get more included in the business. So the way you can alleviate burden, streamline inefficiencies, talk to them about what's going right, what's not going right, and help those gaps. That's a great way to kind of get your foot in the door as a CISO.
And sometimes you just have to have unpopular opinions, right? I mean, you alluded to it that sometimes you have difficult conversations. And how do you deal with that? Because again, it's as sometimes cybersecurity is the inverse of business enabler. Uh, and there's sometimes the business unit see it as a burden as opposed to enabler of business. And so you're not always popular, but you need a buy-in from the rest organization to do anything. Otherwise, you get that pushback, and then eventually you're not going to succeed. How would you overcome all those moving pieces to still get what you want, but not becoming as unpopular as some people are when they talk about cyber?
So I think there's a couple of keys here. The first thing that I would say is you really need to build the relationships of trust up front. When I am helping someone, naturally it creates a opportunity where they want to return the favor. So before you start asking for all of these things, what have you done to build a relationship with your peers that you're going to ask a favor from later on? The second thing that I would say is you need to understand, is this a big ask or is this an easy ask? And how do you make it as easy as possible for the organization? So let's just say, for example, people log in with the username and password, and you're going to add multi-factor authentication. Well, the sales department may say, well, grandma can't use MFA. She doesn't understand how to do this. We're just going to prevent sales when she can't log into the system. And, that's that initial pushback you're going to have to overcome. The easiest way to do that is to talk about compliance and expectations. So you can say, hey, this isn't me asking this. This is the industry asking this. This is what's happened with companies who've been breached for not having this. This is companies that have been sued by their customers because they lost data for not having this. And you talk about the why. And certainly there are going to be things that the business hates, and maybe even you hate as a CISO. And I'll give you the example. Third-party risk management is a process. I think if you were to go to most CISOs, you would say, define what that is. They would say it's the process where we all lie to each other about how good our security is so that we can all get things approved and work concurrently. And maybe that's a little bit too far. I'm being facetious, but we
You're
spend
just a little
time
bit
on third.
sarcastic, but
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure you're close to in actuality what's going on. You're just telling it like it is.
yeah. And so, we have things that we spend a lot of hours on because there's a regulation that tells us to do it, not because it's the most effective thing at stopping risks. So there's always this balance between how much risk mitigation do I do versus how much compliance do I check off. And you need to do both at a level that works for your organization.
And so you created content around how to become a CISO. So first and foremost, like, do you, and I kind of alluded before we pressed record, I was like, do you even want to become one? Uh, it's like, beware for what you ask for. I think I think, CISO is it sounds like a glamorous, role where you have the burden of protecting the entire organization. It's all on your shoulders. And there's some sort of almost like enigma and like halo around it, right? Like, because it's mysterious. in a lot of sense, the people that from the outside looking in. But then it has a lot of drawbacks as well because it's quite a bit of stress associated with it, some burnout as well, and also inability to really have control. Meaning you have this vast organizations with a lot of potential holes in it, and then but you're still responsible. You're still responsible for all these systems and people. And so, talk to me about whether first, like whether you really want to become one, and then secondly, uh, why did you feel that there was a need to provide some sort of guidance on how to become one?
Yeah, so I always like to have authority and control over my life. And there's nothing I hate more than working for a boss who makes dumb decisions that I have to, uh, salute and just kind of follow those things when I believe they're just idiot moves. And so, because of not wanting to live in this Dilbert reality, what I found is the best way is to step up into those leadership roles where I had more control over the organization. And that may not be the same for everybody. Some people just love to pen test, and God bless you. I think that's amazing. We need skilled pen testers. Don't leave that if you're having a lot of fun. But for people who really love mentoring, strategies, building out programs, having lots of influence, all the public speaking, executive, competencies, there's a role for you, and that's moving up in the leadership role. So don't feel like you have to, but if you love that sort of thing, absolutely pursue your passions. And then as I started going up this track, what I found was people were telling pieces of the solution. You could go and you could read McKinsey to learn communication skills, strategic planning, but nothing was specific for cyber. And so as I talked to my friends about here's what I'm learning each week, I started mentoring them. And then I said, well, it's kind of a pain that I have to, talk to John on Tuesday and Shri on Thursday and the list goes on. So how do I just record what my experiences are and share this with the world? And that's where the podcast kind of came from with CISO Tradecraft. And so it was a way to really mentor at scale, a way to help people to understand what all the opportunities were for them. And it's grown really bigger than I ever could imagine. We have over 32,000 followers on LinkedIn, and it's very humbling to say, like, wow, people actually like these opinions. And then from there, now I'm doing things at Team 8 where I've switched to how do I become an influencer to help hundreds of CISOs? And so ways where you can have more impact is really, really key. And you're right, there are a lot of stressors. Look, there's a lot of people who want to hang a CISO out to dry when a breach happens at a company. And sometimes it's fair, sometimes it's not fair. But overall, if you view the value of being able to lead, being able to help, being able to influence, I think it's an amazing opportunity.
Absolutely. And if not just for CISOs, I mean, the idea is that even as a cybersecurity professional, or even a non-cybersecurity professional or IT, just the fact that you can listen in and gather some insight in terms of what the CISO cares about, and what are the issues that's facing that role. It's universal across the board for the organization itself. So there's a lot to be said about the knowledge you provide specifically to non-CISOs or people that don't necessarily have to, not the traditional target audience. Is that a correct statement?
I think so. And, one of the questions I've always debated in my head and never gotten an answer is who do you learn more from, the chief finance officer or the chief legal officer? And they both have very different ways of viewing things and ranking things. A lot of times, the finance officer controls the whole SOC process. So, understanding how you meet Sarbanes Oxley and what are all the control attestations, and how do you look at things from a financial perspective? And that's really, really helpful because a lot of cyber is compliance. And then when you go over and you talk to the legal side, everything's a risk, right? What are the things we can do that are against the law, which we obviously are not going to do those things? And what are the things that, are kind of in this gray area where you have to go and talk to outside counsel to figure out, hey, how do we solve these things? You get those recommendations and then you implement those. And that's what I found a lot of times as a CISO, where there would be laws being passed. I read these laws and many of them are vague. right? It's like, hey, you need to log all the things. Well, I don't know what logging all the things really means. Is it application logs? Is it system logs? Is it network logs? Is it cloud logs? And is it from all the systems or just the critical systems? And so some of these things, they put on paper and you think it means really, really specific things until you talk to, cyber experts who have 20 different opinions on these things. And you're just trying to figure out, how do I follow this to the best way possible in a way that's reasonable for people who are going to audit or oversee me in some way and understand those things. And so getting outside perspectives from the risk on the legal side and from the compliance on the accounting auditing side, those are really, really beneficial people to have as mentors. And then when you go and you talk to them and say, hey, I'm going to bring this to the risk committee, what do you think? Is this too technical? Does this actually provide value to you? Or am I stuck in a cyber echo chamber that I need to get out of?
Yeah, and it's amazing how the practice itself is interconnected, meaning there's no standalone technical or cyber issues. It's always has dotted lines to everything, like the compliance, the business, different areas of that are always interconnected. You cannot look at almost any issue as complete standalone. And let me ask you this: the role itself has been evolving, meaning I don't think that the CISO role 10 years ago is the same as it is today. N- for various reasons. I think from the way the market is evolved, from regulatory perspective, you can tell that even by the way who CISO used to report to. He used to necessarily report to the CIO or VP or something, and then now that you have CISOs that are reporting to the CEO. So very different reporting structure that kind of shows the differences in terms of how we evolve. Any comments about this?
Yeah, the role is really going to continue to evolve. First of all, there's more regulations and compliance that didn't used to be, right? If you just look at NYDFS, the New York Department of Financial Services, they require the CISO to speak to the board. They require the CISO to do lots of things. And so that didn't used to exist years ago. So I think we're going to see that role being up leveled. At the same time, there's always this challenge a little bit, which is, hey, CISO is predominantly talking about IT. Let's stick them under the CIO because that's where 90% of the work is happening. And so, that's kind of right in some ways, because you're doing a lot of vulnerability management. You're, deploying lots of tools and technologies like identity access management tools. But, at the other end of the spectrum, the CISOs of tomorrow will really understand how the business makes money. And I'll just give you an example. At Capital One, 80% of our money felt like it came in through the credit cards. So if that's your number one way you make money as a company, well, then you better spend, 80% of your time understanding how to secure credit cards, because that's where the biggest risk to the company comes if we can't deliver those applications and that availability. So I think that's a really, really big thing. And then it's also partnering with the business and not just the IT. If the business and it really wants to go somewhere, they're probably going to lead on their marketing efforts. So be very, very close with the marketing team and say, what is it you're trying to do more of? Are you trying to talk to more customers? Are you trying to launch new product service lines? What are you trying to do that's really going to help your bottom line? And then from there, partner with them, right? If they want to talk to more customers, great. Let's find a way where we can, build some mobile apps. Let's make sure we're on all the social media sites where the target rich environment of customers are. Let's build those ways to do things. Maybe somebody has a mobile app and they get a notification, hey, there's a 15% off coupon going on today, and that drives customer traffic. Amazing. How did you build that from a security perspective to enable the business to make more money? And when you do those partnerships together, that's a great story to tell the leadership team of how security is enabling the business to make more money.
And it's super interesting to build upon that. There are other ways you can enhance businesses. First and foremost, even transactions, right? So if you can have, by definition, secure transactions that are quicker, uh, to remove that hurdle in advance to create a transaction, to increase the velocity of the transaction by reducing the friction associated with some of the security controls. Even that can enable a quicker transaction business velocity, which in turn translate to higher revenue. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah. So if you start to look at the click stream behavior, and that is how many clicks does it take to do something? If it takes five, kludgy pages on a form to finally get to checking out of the shopping cart, that's customer friction that you're creating, right? Versus if it's 2 clicks, hey, that sounds like more of an optimized, streamlined experience. So you need to understand what it is to be a customer, what it is to go through the product space, what it is to make security easy, and maybe another example of this is customer portals. If you send customer information to their email, well, guess what? That's a place where it can be lost on the customer side. It makes it hard for people to find things in their emails. Versus, if you have a portal site where someone just gets a notification, you have something in your inbox, and then they go in and then they can do a live chat with a help desk representative where they can upload documents in your portal experience that's secure. You know, that is a way to benefit the business, to benefit the customer experience. And I think that translates into a positive brand image for companies.
And speaking of a brand, customers are starting to pay attention to, at least not so much if they were more secure, but definitely if you are notoriously insecure. So I've seen sometimes, you go into a forum where they tell you, "Oh, I don't buy from that retailer because you're mostly, they were hacked 3 times, and therefore your odds of getting your information stolen from that particular company uh, is very high." So again, I think that's another trend that's changing, that the consumers and customers are starting to pay attention. Maybe not so much who's secure, but who is definitely insecure, right?
Yeah, there's a little bit of that happening, right? Certainly you can look at companies that have been breached multiple times. And I'll give you an example of T-Mobile. It's very public how many times they've been breached, and it's more than 5. And as a, former T-Mobile subscriber, that's scary. And there are some customers who just absolutely are too lazy to switch their phone
Well,
numbers to go to somebody
Ross,
else.
they're gonna give you a credit monitoring right after.
Yeah. Yeah, well, if anybody believes credit monitoring is gonna do anything to help you, I don't know, I think it's our biggest scam of all that we have right now.
Well, I think the problem is you already had one from the previous breach.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
I
how
mean,
many can you have and simultaneously?
yeah. So, I don't know if this cost of all the customers avoiding us is reality or fiction. Certainly, I think there are companies who are gonna have a much harder time going forward. Like, if I'm a security company, and I'm not gonna name the vendor, but I think most people get the image, and I do identity access management. And I've had no less than 3 breaches where I actually enabled bad actors to get into companies. Well, I think smart CISOs are gonna remember that when they do their rebids for those identity access management companies. Other companies, hey, if it happens once every couple years, that's probably just the norm for our industry because there isn't any company that can't be breached. But if you're batting over 5 or 9 data breaches, something's wrong with this picture. And I think you really need to be doing something different.
What about the security vendors that get hacked themselves?
So I think it's a hard thing, right? I mentioned one identity access management provider, and I'm deliberately not saying the name because
And
I don't want.
there was another one just announced, again, we're not going to name names. It's not about shaming anybody, but, some big ones that just had hundreds of gigabytes of customer data stolen. And it's almost happens to almost daily. Don't they like eat their own dog food per se? Like, don't they know how to protect themselves if they're a security vendor? What's the issue there?
So I'm going to make the challenge that I don't think any company 100% knows how to protect themselves, because as CISO you never have 100% understanding. And just imagine you're at a large company where there are 5,000 developers in your organization. Do you know how every single one of them coded every application? Absolutely not. Do you know which things are misconfigured? Do you even have tests to check if the misconfigurations exist? Do you know all of the shadow IT that may have been stood up in an organization? Do you know when a developer created, freaking default password credentials that should have been changed? We are very limited based on the tools that tell us what we need to fix. We will never know everything. We can only do certain proactive actions like make sure everything is patched, check things against CIS benchmarks. But there's a lot of things that we will never be able to test against. And so we're always going to be, struggling to know the reality of what our organization is from a security perspective.
And what about CISOs becoming personally liable to mishaps or not having the ability to do the right thing, or just being forced to? Or and we've so that's number one. Number two, there was an advertisement recently about CISOs being on the playing both ends. They're on the board of certain vendors, and then they're also recommending these vendors, and so there's conflict of interest there. Maybe talk two separate questions here, but maybe talk to me about that change and kind of the area of how CISOs operate.
So nobody expects a perfect program. What they do expect is reasonable security and anything that you're putting in paper to be true. And I think that's the key, right? So, how do I build a security program that is defendable? These are the things I'm following. And if I don't have money to do something, is that okay?
And
And
Ross,
when it's not
there's
okay,
just to double click on it. It's really important what you just said, defendable. And there's also, I think, some legal terms for that specifically, like you do the due diligence, or you have I forgot the terms, are basically just saying like you've done the best to your abilities, as you described from your technology perspective, the investment, and to the best of your abilities to protect the organization. Right? It's almost like a legal term as well to allow CISOs to defend their stance in terms of what they did.
absolutely. Like nobody expects a 10-person cybersecurity team to do the same thing as a Fortune 500 company. They're constrained by the number of people, the number of tools, the amount of budget, and all of the things that they can focus on. But did you maybe check off the CIS 18 as, a fundamental list of practices that your organization is doing? And then the second thing that is really, really important is anything you put out to external entities needs to be factual. If you're saying we do vuln management and you don't do vuln management, you're you're lying to your investors, to your regulators, and then that's where CISOs end up in hot water. The hard problem really is a lot of those external communications are not always written by the CISO. So what goes out in a SEC report, CISOs maybe never even wrote anything on it, and there may be a section in there about the whole cybersecurity risk piece. And so is that accurate? Or if you disagree with this, how are you talking to the leadership team to fix those issues? That's the most important thing. And it's a tough place to be in because if you say, hey, we don't do these things, and you're pushing back on those, sometimes that can be negatively perceived by an organization.
And then what about the kind of the hot water, or CISOs being on the board of vendors, security vendors, and then making recommendations potentially to, for the same vendors, at their organizations or others? And there was some publication they were part of a venture fund that was, that had success by operating that way. And again, not to name names at all.
Yeah, so CISOs need to be honest and they need to be ethical. And if you are taking money, or maybe you're a paid advisor and you get stock options from a company, you should never be on the selection committee of that tool because it is a conflict of interest. So if I was, let's say, buying Qualys and I am, 10% of my retirement is invested in Qualys, I would immediately need to go to my ethics and compliance officers and say, somebody else needs to run this purchase decision, or we cannot buy this tool if nobody else is qualified to do this. So I think that I don't even think there's a gray area to debate this. I think this is very, very well known. And I think the CISOs who are doing these things where they're paid advisors to companies, they're getting kickbacks, that's just unethical and wrong to me. I don't think that should persist.
Yeah, and ethics and transparency always wins. We grew up with the notion of doing the right thing. And so declaring that you have a stake in the business is doing the right thing. And then you can, even if you advertise it and just say, listen, this is what, I have a stake in the business, fully transparency. Do you want me to proceed? Or at least, let's put all the cards on the table, and it's okay if they accept that. And then you can move forward. But you're right. It's not okay to not having full transparency. Let's talk a bit about, and we are running out of time, so I wanted to cover that. There's a trend now of virtual CISOs everywhere, where you see that organizations they can potentially hire a full CISO. They have a fractional one where you have a CISO that resides on, basically on the different, I guess a chunk of time for different companies. What's your opinion about this trend, and how effective is that really? Because I can see some issues with that, just the inability to, for example, to really be part of the organization and really understand all the different controls associated with the particular area.
So I think it's a good thing, and I'm going to put some caveats on it. The first thing is there's always going to be small organizations that need cybersecurity help, but don't have a dedicated full-time staff member to do this. So doing it at a partial rate makes a lot of sense. You can just think of your local dentist office. They're collecting your personal healthcare information. You want that to be secure. But at the same time, they don't need to have a CISO at every 20-person dental shop that's there. It's just unrealistic. Now, the problem that I wonder is, what is the quality of virtual CISOs that you're getting? Because there's really no barrier to entry for someone to go create an LLC tomorrow and then say, hey, I'm a virtual CISO and I have zero experience at doing this. It's just their ability to sell and close deals. And so I think that's the thing. It's this high amount of competition, and not everybody is equal. So how do we make sure that those small businesses that need good people to help with high trust and HIPAA compliance and just securing their systems get the talent that they think they're getting, and they're not being swindled by someone who claims to do good security but isn't giving them the value that they expect?
Maybe we do a session about how to choose the right one, how to choose the CISO. And I think that'd be a popular one. So from that regards, we covered quite a bit. Is super useful. I think that there's just a lot of areas that are still open for discussion. And as you mentioned, things are evolving. We might be doing this again in 6 to 12 months, and things are going to look very different. But overall, from your experience, this was very rewarding career for yourself. So you do recommend, let's wrap up with this. You do recommend pursuing this career path, right? At least from your perspective, it's very, very lucrative and just very beneficial and rewarding for you.
I absolutely loved it. And who knows, maybe one day I'll go back to being a CISO at a Fortune 500 type company. I think it's an amazing role. I think there's a lot of ability that you have to protect, to help organizations and make really, really big changes amongst teams. So I wouldn't trade that away for anything. At the same time, I would say do your due diligence. Make sure you understand what that role is before you put yourself into that. Because if you're thinking, hey, I'm going to do all these cool red teaming, things. And then you spend all of your time in procurement decisions and HR discussions. You may find it's not what you really thought it was to begin with. But that being said, I think there's some amazing opportunities. I think it's a very, very important role. Certainly, I want my data to be protected, and we need people to help protect companies, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a matter of national security, pun intended, especially with your background. Uh, Last thing I'll mention is that, and I have to bring this up, is had a preview of a quote unquote synthetic AI CISO. Basically, somebody's trying to automate this whole practice. Basically, a system that takes all the telemetry and logs and information from all the tools available to the organization, uh, takes it into some sort of large language model, LLM, and then spits out recommendations just like a CISO would to protect the organization. What's your take on it? And then we'll part ways.
So I think that tooling exists. There's good companies. We have some in our teammate portfolio that are doing in this space and is very, very valuable. At the same time, don't forget that companies run on relationships, right? When you go to dinner and you talk to people and you bond and connect over travel, that's what builds the friendships. And a lot of times, what happens in companies is people call their friends for favors. And that is never going to be captured into a tool, right? If I've hung out with you for 20 years and I said, "Hey man, I really need a favor," you can get a lot of stuff done when it's someone who you've worked and just built that relationship with. So I think obviously having real-time telemetry helps make better informed decisions. Use that all day long, but don't forget building relationships is one of your most powerful weapons as a CISO.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was about to say that the last CISO has been born already, meaning that things are going to sunset, but it doesn't seem like that from what you just described, which makes a lot of sense. That was wonderful conversation, Russ. It's been really insightful. Let me ask you this: how does the people get to know more about you, about the podcast, the program, just get in touch and whatnot?
Yeah, so a couple things. First thing is I'm very active on LinkedIn. So if you ever want to connect, just reply to any of the posts that I have, and I'm happy to connect with any of the folks out there, especially CISOs. Right now, my job at Teammate is really focused on giving lots of content to help CISOs be better in their roles. So if you're an active CISO and you want help or you want to get cutting edge trends and technology, please reach out to me on LinkedIn. That's a fantastic way. And if you're not a CISO, but you really want to become a CISO, I can't recommend it enough, but check out CISO Tradecraft. It's a podcast, it's a YouTube, it's on all the different places where you can go and learn. And I think that is really the culmination of a lot of my efforts to help train the next generation of CISOs.
Absolutely. And you're doing an amazing job at generating unique, original, and very, very high quality content. And we need more of this as this industry, it takes a village, right? So this industry, uh, gets a lot of value from people giving back like you are. So thank you very much for joining me today. Much, much appreciated. For all those who joined, thank you again, and see you in the next episode. And until then, be safe online as well as offline. I'll see you guys soon. Thank you very much.